Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's IANA webinar, this industry session with Gene Seroka. Gene is the Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, and he is also the Chief Logistics Officer of the City of Los Angeles. Before we dive in, I want to thank our Platinum Plus sponsors for bringing this session to everyone. They support us throughout the year with a lot of great support for our educational programming, in particular this session. So thank you to all of them. So without further ado, I am really excited to have Gene here today. Gene's kind of a stalwart in the industry, kind of a go-to guy for problem solving, and a good friend of IANA. And just to get us started, Gene, I think a lot of people do know you, but I think people would benefit from a refresher, and those friends joining us that don't. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started in transportation, and a little bit of your history?
Sure. Thanks, Alan. It's great to be with everyone today, and thank you again to IANA and Joni Casey for the invitation to this great event. I started in the industry by happenstance. Although my dad was with American Airlines for 40 years in both passenger and freight, when I was ready to graduate with my MBA out of the University of New Orleans, it was just after the stock market crash of 1987. Oil was less than $10 a barrel, and a city like New Orleans that is so important to the tourism and energy industries was flat on its back, and there were no jobs to be had. So it was in the days before email and the internet, so I would send out letters to corporations all over the country, and I received rejection letters from those same corporations, and I saved every one of them. But at one point, my dad said, you may want to go look at a search firm, or what in those days we called a headhunter. And there was a boutique firm right down off the Central Business District in New Orleans. And I got really lucky to meet a lady who was able to show me a little bit more about the international transportation world, and got me an interview with American President Lines. And the only reason I got that interview was my dad worked for the airline and I could fly for free. So I got on an airplane a couple mornings later at like 0600, went to Cincinnati, had an interview. Unbeknownst to me, if I did well there, I was going to Chicago in the afternoon to meet someone else for an interview with that same company, and got an entry-level job with that organization and spent 26 years with them, including about 11 overseas. And then in 2014, I had the great fortune of getting the nod from Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti to come here to the Western Hemisphere's largest container port and lead its efforts. And I've been here now for about 6.5 years.
That's outstanding. What a great story. The industry leaders we have, the good hiring practice folks at APL to thank for bringing you guys into the industry is really great. So another excellent APL alum that is giving back. Gene, the supply chain's really facing a lot of headwinds, to put it mildly. We went from a trade war, and then a Lunar New Year, and then a pandemic, and that's really generated a lot of stop and start for the freight volume. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and how the port and the terminals are trying to manage the current volumes and what the way forward looks like?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. We've been going through this choppiness in our supply chain now for the better part of 2 3/4 years, since the Section 301 and 232 tariffs were introduced at the beginning of the U.S.-China trade tensions. And ever since then, it's been a wave of imports and a lull, a wave of imports and an evacuation of empty containers. It was a spurt of exports and hopefulness in a phase one trade deal that has absolutely fizzled to this point. But the lack of continuity, or the lack of certainty within the industry, has hampered all of us, from asset providers to knowledge folks to the people on the ground running technology platforms. Everybody has been really scrambling. And what we see right now is exactly what you described since the beginning of the year. Right around Lunar New Year, the central government in China decided to go to a safer at home order, so factories shut down and all commerce. We were watching this real closely, even monitoring truck traffic, energy consumption, pollution, to see how they would ramp back up again to match with our consumption. And things were pretty bleak when we looked into the abyss here in the month of March, with about 450,000 container units crossing our docks. We really thought that this would be a tremendous problem for some time to come. And what we've seen since then is a need to push those empty containers back to Asia, and we've done that on successive waves. I said we'd have probably about 3 levels of a pendulum effect. One, to get these empties evacuated and pre-position the assets to prepare for the first wave of imports as we came off our safer at home orders across the nation. With the emerging American economy slowly opening up, we started to see imports start to pick up, but we really continue to face a problematic export market, mainly on the heels of the trade tensions and the retaliatory tariffs. So at this juncture now, we've got some digital information that really gives us a line of sight up to 40 days out on cargo coming our way. More importantly, we introduced a new package off the Port Optimizer, which is our nation's only port community system, called the Signal. And the Signal aggregates all the data that we have here at the Port of Los Angeles, driven by U.S. Customs, to show 3 weeks out what's coming at us. And we can report now for the week of the 16th of November, we'll have the highest import volume on record here at the Port of Los Angeles, in part because of the strong replenishment market, and secondly, because we've started to see these ships slide from 1 week to the next because of just simply the deluge of cargo we have coming in. I think the Los Angeles marine terminal operators are working around the clock to try to find solutions for our truck and rail community, all underpinned by the requirements of the cargo owners here nationwide. And these numbers are high for one simple reason. We're not spending money on services. We as American consumers are spending that cash on tangible goods. So we're not going to baseball games, save a couple of folks in Arlington earlier this past month who witnessed the Dodgers win the World Series. And we're not going to the movies. We're not going to the opera. We're not flying on airplanes predominantly. We didn't have family vacations this summer. So that cash seems to be going to what we've been doing, going to the big box retailers because they remained open, going to our home improvement and hardware stores. Some have gone to their auto dealerships with record-breaking zero down, zero APR prices. And others have bought online. I don't think I've ever had a full stock of LSU gear in my closet like I do today, simply because of the ease of shopping online through the omni-channel distribution network. And all of those retailers, whether they be fulfillment, internet, Amazon themselves, or others, have to replenish all this stock that we've been buying.
It's a really interesting time, and I think you tapped into a few things that I definitely want to dig into a little bit more. The first is, and I mentioned it in our intro, that in addition to your role leading the port, you're also the chief logistics officer for the city of Los Angeles. So that plays into this next question, which is obviously the pandemic's affected everyone. And you really kind of hit on particularly the effects on our behavior and how that relates to the economy. But what are some of the lessons that you've seen from, I guess I would say both hats you're wearing, the port side, but also from the logistics side where you're seeing kind of a different perspective than I think what a lot of folks are seeing?
Yeah, I think number one is community. And whether it be where you live, where you work, where you do your business, people have really come together and leave politics aside. Working with the people in our industry, our longshore leadership, to the rank and file, to the truck drivers, the big companies and small who have donated products to get to our hospitals, it's just been so heartening. And we've called on people that we've known for 30 years. We've had folks call us that we didn't even know, offering a hand of assistance. And I tell you, it has just been so rewarding to get into the mix with people who have the same thoughts and same vision, aspiration to help their fellow man and woman. It's really been the driving force. I run to work every day. I come into this office every single day since the emergency orders have been handed out because we've got work to do here. Whether it was the original definition, albeit a little bit fraught with anxiety about the essential worker and who should be on the job, who should be working from home, to what we needed to do for the health and safety of our longshore members. And again, here, great credit to a guy like Willie Adams, the international president of the ILWU, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, for sitting down with the Employers Association led by Jim McKenna to hammer out some business rules really fast around health and safety of our workers. We jumped into action by working with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's great general manager, Marty Adams. And quickly, within about 3.5 hours, Marty had a truck pull up with 2 drums of 700-gallon industrial bleach, so we could dilute them with our hazmat team, put them in 16-ounce spray bottles and speed them out to the marine terminals so our longshore men and women could clean and sanitize the equipment and communications devices before passing them on to the next shift. And these were all in the early days when we were trying to decipher what the CDC standard was, what the Los Angeles Health County standard was, and how we could get that information out to the rank and file so we can clean and sanitize all this equipment. It was just a work of brilliance by the leadership in those two areas, and I'm so glad we had the ability to participate and help out just a little bit. The other thing we've learned is that there were some activities taking place that would make a grown man like me cry. We had hospitals like St. Francis right up the freeway in Linwood, or Pomona Valley just down the 60 freeway, sending out staff to the grocery store to buy trash bags because their doctors and nurses couldn't find the proper gear to try to treat our COVID-19 patients. They didn't have the level 2 isolation gowns. They didn't have the bouffant hair coverings, the nitro gloves, the N95 masks. And in part, they were trying to supplement that with trash bags. So we jumped into action soon as Mayor Eric Garcetti set out the vision of what Love LA was going to do, Logistics Victory Los Angeles. And it was our fight against COVID-19 that was right in the crosshairs. We went out and tried to match those with supplies who needed them. We tried to work with manufacturers that we've known in our industry for decades, and even convert some California-based manufacturers with the great help of Lance Hastings, who heads up the California Manufacturer and Technology Association up in Sacramento, to see if they could bring furloughed workers back and start producing personal protective equipment for our frontline hospitals. But nothing was better than hitting the home run with the iconic American company Honeywell Corporation and procuring 24 million N95 masks that we would then pass on to the hospitals, first responders, and others at cost with no markup, no margin. And a procurement plan that was really led by our own Aveen Sharma, who was chasing down leads all around the world to get ready-made, purpose-built N95s right here to the city of Los Angeles for distribution. And at this juncture, Hal, we've now distributed 3.1 million units of personal protective equipment to more than 36 Los Angeles area hospitals and nearing 130 skilled nursing facilities. Job's not done, but it sure is a good start.
That's a terrific story, especially when you consider kind of building the plane as you were flying it, or the ship as it was sailing is probably a better metaphor for us today. But kudos to you guys. But I guess it really makes sense. When you have a seemingly insurmountable logistics challenge, who do you go to? You go to the pros that run the busiest in North America and say, hey, how do we make all these disparate pieces work together? Because that's really kind of what you do every day, right? As you pull together innumerable disparate pieces and they all kind of sing when they get rolling. Speaking of the port complex, and it is, as folks can see from behind you, it is a sprawling kind of city unto itself almost, with a huge amount of very unique infrastructure to a port complex. Could you talk a little bit about the port's infrastructure needs and how they plug into the larger sort of North American intermodal supply chain needs?
Yeah, it's a great question, Hal. And I think looking behind me here on this satellite photo of the port, you've got 7,500 acres of property, 27 terminals, 270 berths, 43 miles of waterway. This truly is an engineering marvel that was designed and developed generations ago, all with reclaimed land. What you see behind me is all landfill and the creation of this port itself. And combined with our neighboring port at Long Beach, we represent managing 40% of our nation's imports from around the world right through this gateway. And I think the more intriguing fact is that the Port of Los Angeles and the cargo that traverses its docks reaches each and every one of our 435 congressional districts. This truly is a conversation of national significance. That being said, the infrastructure needs are no different than ports large and small around the country, because they do so much to fuel the economic value in those regions. But here in Los Angeles, we face something very unique, and it has been the declining market share for 2 decades. The question of competitiveness has been raised, whether it be financial or operational. And realistically speaking, others have capitalized on that. They've hired great talent to lead their ports. They've aligned their legislatures and elected officials, policymakers, and the federal government has seen that. Over the last decade, monies out of Washington to the East and Gulf ports have outstripped those invested in the West Coast ports 10-1. Federal government has invested nearly $12 billion in East and Gulf ports and $1.2 billion along the West Coast. We need to punch above our weight now and find ways that we can draw not only investment, but interest in how we do our business. And although it's a little different than a river port, we've got capabilities here through various pieces of legislation that need to be capitalized on as quickly as possible to manage these large swaths of cargo that come at us now with a lot more dexterity and nimbleness than we've ever shown before.
That's great insight, particularly kind of putting that into the larger national perspective. The discussions may change now with a new administration coming in, and I appreciate you sharing that insight, because I think it's important for folks to think about the big picture. In terms of data, because you'd mentioned it before, and I think it's on a lot of folks' minds, the port really pioneered the identification and collection of critical supply chain data, kind of out there before anybody with your portal. Could you talk a little bit about data sharing and the experience from the portal and how you've worked with all of the intermodal stakeholders, what you've learned and the values that you've seen, and kind of where you see it going?
Well, there is no doubt that information sharing will make our supply chain more fluid and more predictable, which is exactly what our mutual customer, the cargo owners, have simply asked of us. What we found early on is that we had some real champions in this area, like Rebecca Dye from the Federal Maritime Commission, and Penny Pritzker, who was at the time the Secretary of Commerce, and then so many others that said, if our industry can come together, share information, we may have a chance of doing things a little bit better. And this all came on the heels of the congestion that we witnessed in 2014 and 15. That's been well calculated, tabulated. But what we saw here was an opportunity to create relationships, and that was a leader like Rich DiNucci at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, who thought sharing the advanced manifest system data from Asia, the 24-hour manifest rule before a vessel leaves its Asia last port of call to come to the States, was a really good idea, so long as we set up strong business rules and we don't share anything of a proprietary nature. We follow the regulations and guidelines all the way through. And we thought early on that if we're going to go after this like we have been known for on the physical infrastructure side with digital infrastructure, we would have to prove to the world that we were just as good at the stewardship of the data as we have been with our land and water over this 114 years the port has been in existence. So I feel confident about those core tenets. We saw a lot of people jump at shadows, that my information is valuable and you cannot get it. You're going to share proprietary data. You're going to package my data and sell it. And I can report to you, because of the great framework we put in place, none of those three things ever happened. And they won't under our watch. Setting up ideas like data sharing agreements, a real contract between the service provider, the Port of Los Angeles, and our partner, co-creator, Wabtec, the former General Electric Transportation, have held that level of integrity at its ultimate highest. Unfortunately, not everybody wants to participate. And part of the reason that we're in the situation we are right now, not being able to handle this deluge of imports, this one-way trade, because our export has been hampered so much, is because not everyone has joined our data positioning at this juncture. And we encourage those to join. I think we've got a track record now to get past whatever fear may exist, but you also still have people that don't want to see competition rise. And where some like me believe a rising tide lifts all boats, not everybody wants to see their competitor kind of catch up. And that's been unfortunate, because we've got so many people that fiercely compete against each other every day. But at this port complex, you have to get things moving, a system of systems that will allow for a deeper line of sight and the ability to prepare. If you're a trucker, a Western Railroad, the Short Line Railroad, our Pacific Harbor Line, and so many others, the great forwarder broker community we have here in Southern California, having that single source of truth so they can plan both assets and staffing is critical, and we're not seeing it any more clearly than we are today.
We've definitely seen that at the association level, folks wanting solutions, and it's a matter of evolving. As the younger folks come into the industry, certainly we've seen a lot of folks saying, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we change our business rules to incorporate, transferring data to our trusted partners who, will do better and treat us better if we give them the information that they need to do their business. In terms of looking back on your time in the industry, what do you see as some of the most pivotal moments throughout your career, and why did they stick with you, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, I think I would put it into three categories. One, I alluded to it when I was looking for a job right out of graduate school, and it's the fact that during my career, I've witnessed 7 major economic shocks on a global scale, including the one we witnessed today and that we're trying to work through with COVID-19. What I did find in just trying to compare those 7 and contrast them was that we went into the economic shock as an industry looking one way, we came out completely different. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to see ahead of the game just a little bit right now. And most of the conversation in our area here and with the industry has been that with the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, it took this port of Los Angeles 10 years to recover the volume it had earned in the full year ending 2008, 10 years. And although it was pretty bold at the time, I said, we're not going to wait that long this time. We've got to find new and creative ways to do our business to help support our customers, our service providers and partners. And although we see this early and there's still a long way to go, we were pretty aggressive as an industry, as a port, as a city in trying to drive business as best we could. Once we kind of figured out what the consumer buying pattern would be for you and me, where the focus would be, and how we needed to attack some of the bottlenecks or hurdles in the industry. And I think we got the predictions pretty close to being right, maybe for the first time in a long time. But at the same time, we still face a lot of concerns that we're just throwing all this cargo into the filter real quick, and we've got to work a little bit closer together, share some data, and come up with these unique aspects that people like Weston LeVar of the Harbor Trucking Association have been calling for. Dual transactions, working on turn times, getting rid of the chassis splits so we can have better round trip economics for our truck community, and a litany of other ideas that have come from industry leaders on the ground here and in far-reaching locations. So that's one piece. The second has been innovation. And whether it be today's era of technology, and we see so much traction in this area, but not just enough yet. We also saw at the beginning of my career the invention of the double stack train in 1979, and how that has changed the way we started to look at intermodal cargo with a more scientific approach that we now see today with so many experts involved in our business here in the lower 48. As well as Canada and Mexico, 2 of our greatest trading partners. And then the third piece, I would say, really comes around to what it's going to look like for the people involved here. And when I was coming up through the industry, we talked a lot about the globalization of business, the outsourcing of manufacturing, where as we put our budgets together every year, for those of us that were on the import side of the business, it was GDP times about 4 that would try to predict what our import volume is. Now, life has changed tremendously since then, but it's how globalization looks. Now you've got a different scan through various eyes of saying it's more towards a nationalistic view. But to me, there's no reason that the 2 largest economies in the world can't and should not trade together, so long as there are good business rules in place that advance our economies, our people, and our strategies around being good citizens on the global scale.
That's great advice, and hopefully folks, will take that to heart, because I think that's the way forward. In terms of folks that are sort of just starting out, do you have any tips on sort of areas that they should focus some attention on to upskill as they're coming into the industry? Like, what would your wisdom be for them?
Well, I don't know if it's wisdom, but something that helped me a little bit. I would recommend to the younger folks, or those who are reinventing themselves, especially in such a difficult economic time that we face, with more than 10 million Americans out of work, 55 million have applied for benefits. So there are a lot of us, and a lot in my vintage, that are trying to reposition. upskill themselves or retrain, come out with a different look as to what needs to happen, in addition to the great and bright future our current students and recent graduates have. And I would say it falls into really three categories: be mobile, be visible, and be durable. And I'll explain all three just briefly. Be mobile. This is a global environment in which we work. And even in the intermodal concept that we have today, its reaches extend to all far-reaching locations around the world. And that business that moves eastbound, westbound, north and south within the traditional NAFTA region, as I mentioned, with our two great trading partners of Canada and Mexico, the world is at your reach. Take an opportunity to be mobile and look beyond your own backyard if that's your preference, but keep an eye out for these opportunities and step up when they come. I had the chance and I took a flying leap, believe it. I landed on the ground in Shanghai and I thought I was at the edge of the earth, literally and physically. But once I got on the ground, I started creating business relationships that have lasted a lifetime, and the learnings I took back about the business practices locally, regionally, internationally were just so fulfilling. On the visibility side, and I fall into this category as well, it's very easy today to send a text, to send a quick video message, to communicate by other means that aren't necessarily interpersonal. But I will tell you, after so much time in this business and spending a lot of time with young people, especially here at a few of our universities in Southern California, and in USC in particular, is that it's still a relationship-based business. Any way you cut it, up and down. People want to see you. Today, we're spending so much time on these video calls to have our meetings that we otherwise would have had in person. The people that I provide service to, the business partners that we have here at the Port of Los Angeles and with the city, want to see us. They want to hear from us. They want to know we're doing okay in this tough time, and they want to be able to share ideas on how we can do better. The third piece is be durable, and it's all about just having thick skin. You know, you're going to have people that critique you. They're going to evaluate you. They're going to have no shortage of advice as you go through your career. And I'll give you one prime example. Early on, I put the pencil to the paper, put around me some good advisors that know policy very well, and I came out very critical about our own country's trade policy with China. And I've taken shots. I've been second guessed, but so far we've been pretty accurate. And it's not against individuals. It's not against politics. It's about what's best for the economy and for the great workforce that we have in the United States. And so I had to step out. You didn't hear too many other people stepping out publicly and talking about this, but I thought I owed it to the more than 1 million people that go to work every day here in Southern California that have jobs related to this port. And I mentioned touching all 435 congressional districts. We also have an attachment to 1 in 52 jobs nationwide that somehow do their business because of cargo that moves through this port. So I had an outsized responsibility. I took it, tempered my message, but tried to make sure that we were speaking on behalf of what this industry sorely needs, and that is definitioning around international trade policy.
I, for one, appreciate that tough stand that you took. We really see eye to eye on that way forward for truly embracing what is a global economy. And
yeah, and on that note, Hal, I worked and lived in China on the ground. I could walk out of my apartment building and buy a DVD of a late-run Hollywood movie for $1. That shouldn't happen. But I also know that the company I represented was the first to gain a wholly foreign-owned enterprise license in China, which allowed us to operate 36 offices in the country without a local partner, without the fear of somebody looking over my shoulder at the IT system or the proprietary information we had. We had a tremendous relationship with the central government, the provincial government, and the municipal governments in places like Shanghai to be able to forward our business on the trading platform. So it can be done. And it just takes a little bit of know-how and then ingenuity from some of the people who are on this call today to think about what those next great things are going to be from the standpoint of international trade and relationship building.
Yeah, well said. Kind of looking forward a little bit, what do you see are some of the most critical things that industry needs to address in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit broadly and then narrow down, but I think number one is talent development. We need to continue to recruit good folks into this industry, build them up, give them the skills and the opportunities that we've just talked about, because we need the leaders of tomorrow. And I think with both the private and public sector work that's done in the supply chain business, intermodalism being a huge anchor to that, we need to do a better job as industry leaders of going out on the road and recruiting ourselves. And I know that virtual road is a little bit different today, but that's why some of this work at the university level, the community colleges, and even younger folks who are looking to some sort of transition and seeing where the supply chain could be for them in the future is key. Number two, I think we really do, and while hope is not a strategy, we need to have a national infrastructure plan and a multimodal freight plan. We've been talking about this at the state level for years. It's never really taken off for reasons that are well beyond me in the political realm. But we've got aging roads and bridges, aging airports and seaports that need modernization that can be a jobs multiplier. You'll have the folks working on it from a policy level. You'll have others that are doing the design of these projects, and then the workers that are out there building them for us. And then following all of that, you'll have the people like me who work at the port, or the longshoremen, or the truck drivers and others who will benefit from all that pre-planning of these assets. So that's where we come up with the term jobs multiplier, and one that'll resonate for decades to come. And then I think thirdly in this area is what you hit on perfectly, is this generation that we're talking about, who I admire so much because I was you some time ago, but I was you, really bright-eyed and thinking, what could we do next? What could we do better? And it's going to be about technology. And it's not about proprietary and who's going to make the most money and what that company is going to do to corner the market, but it's about how information can be shared and really ramped up. I mean, it's so amazing how much we have at our fingertips with one phone today. And I know that's used as the analogy in many conversations we have in our industry, but it's true. How quickly you can access your bank account, your airline ticket, your map, your alarm clock, your flashlight, and everything else in between, where we used to have 25, 30 different devices to do just that. And if we can take that great spirit of ingenuity using API technology to help create end caps that push communication back from service provider to customer faster than the human mind ever imagined, that's where the new frontier is going to be. So setting up open architecture and standards that can be agreed upon in our industry and others that we work with, I think is going to take some real genius, and that's where we're counting on this next generation to step up with all those ideas to make them really happen.
That's great vision, and I appreciate you sharing it. Gene, I'm going to pivot over to some audience questions now, because I want to make sure that we have a chance to get to those. Looking down the road a little bit with COVID, planning for the next phase, which we hope is going to move into the vaccine phase. From your seat, thinking about how does the supply chain approach the vaccine question, what are some of the things that you're thinking about as you start to think about that? I know it's a little bit early in the game, but any thoughts on planning and particularly how Intermodal collectively might be able to help in that response?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and although it's a framework that has a lot of moving pieces, you think about who the customer is. And the customer is each and every one of the 360 plus million American citizens that we need to serve in this response to COVID-19. And it may not be enough just to get vaccine to major metropolitan cities who have state, county, or city funded hospital systems. It may not be enough just to get the vaccine to the major pharmacies that are in our hometowns. How do we get to rural America? How do we get to folks who may not have direct access to the pre-positioned medical facilities that I just mentioned? So we've got to give a lot of thought to how we're going to fan out on a distribution basis. And that starts with the states. Who knows this area better? The geography, the topography, and the demography of their own constituency. So we've got to have a very close collaboration with our states, and then that drops down into the counties and municipalities. We also know in early days from the pharmaceutical companies and the scientists that the care for this serum is going to be different than it is for other vaccines, well below sub-zero, with access to markets that have specific timing requirements. and other details that have been shared with us so far. That's going to be of particular interest to the logisticians in both the private and public sector to see how we go to market. And again, using that customer analogy, I think just fires us up. Again, it's not a financial play, it's not a monetary play for those who are observing here today. It's about how we treat our customers in the commercial environment has got to go to the nth degree of how we treat our customers, the American citizenry. We also have something I think that's cooking really well right now. There's a committee I belong to under the Department of Commerce in Washington that's got leaders like Norm Schenk from UPS, Rick Gabrielson, Rick Blaskin from CSCMP, and others who are volunteering their time to try to help make recommendations to the seniors in the government as to how we would go about this. So I'm starting to see the makings of a real public-private partnership here, again, through the entrepreneurial and volunteerism spirits that we have been counting on for so long. So this is a big piece of work. It's so important that we get it right. We're going to have to roll this out probably in some test markets early because that's how the dosages are going to be coming to us. We've seen the announcement from Pfizer yesterday and through others leading this breakthrough. So we're going to have to do some things. We may fail early on, but we're going to fail forward, learn very quickly, just as we do in the logistics space here in the US, and try to pick this up so we can get to scale as fast as we can as the dosage starts to increase at the pharmaceutical manufacturing level. But this is going to be an important piece of work for all of us, and there's room for many, whether it be volunteering, working with your company's teams, or other ways that you can help us out.
That's great, Gene. I appreciate that, and I think that this is going to be an ongoing conversation that we have as the association with all of our member partners, is keeping folks apprised of what's happening, how they can participate, how it might affect their access to certain infrastructure or certain volumes at certain times, because when the vaccine is available, it's going to need to take priority over other things. So I think being able to plan for that and understand that is going to be critical. Here's one, and I'm going to distill it down a little bit. Do you see the experience from the pandemic having any lasting effects on volumes and kind of where they're entering North America, or do you think it just sort of it's a bit of a jump ball?
Probably a little bit of both, Hal, and I'll tell you why. As we try to replenish the inventory system of our retail level that we're witnessing basically since June, the fastest way to get from Asia to the middle part of the country and the major consumption areas is through Southern California. The quickest way to get the proper goods that are qualified with long-standing relationships was from China. So you pushed all the other rhetoric aside and you got back to the basics of how this industry is really run and the strong engine from China to the United States. What we have seen now are people getting a little bit exasperated with the long trucking lines, the delays, trying to handle so much cargo. And again, I call it one-way traffic because even at the Port of Los Angeles, using that as a barometer, we're down on exports 22 out of the last 23 months, mainly based on the trade tensions. And others that, while trying to go after this in a bilateral fashion, we've given sales leads to every other trading country in the world. Soybeans coming out of Brazil have never been bigger. The ability for our European colleagues to buy China manufactured goods has gone up tremendously. We're seeing container shortages and space shortages there right now, as reported in some of our media outlets just this morning. So the work in this area has got to continue, and that's why I formed a group out here of West Coast business interests to answer the question of competitiveness. And we're focused on three areas: the operations of the port, the finances, and the policy at the government level, federal, state, and local. How we can create more certainty for these customers, how we can create the best value for the dollar. And we're hitting all the criticism head on. But it is going to be a jump ball, to your point, and that's a great analogy. When this cargo subsides, and it will, middle of December, we'll see a little bit of a slowdown as we traditionally have. Christmas goods, year-end holiday goods compared with this replenishment have hit us all three at the same time. It'll slow down. We'll have another bump before the new year. And then we're going to have to really get straight on a couple of these things, both basics as well as longer-term strategies around the policy and how we want to attract business and create jobs here. So there's an opportunity I referenced earlier. Ports around this nation in British Columbia and Mexico have got great talent, alignment with their legislators, and they're pouring money into places that make them more competitive. We've got to find ways to stay a step ahead of that.
That's great, Gene. I appreciate you highlighting the fact that the trade policy that we've been working on has been very gracious to other markets, less so to the domestic market.
And it also, Hal, not to skip over it, but it also deals with environmental policy here in California, which we know is far-reaching compared to any of the other 49 states. And I would never advocate, privately or publicly, that we roll back on any of our environmental requirements here in the state of California as it relates to intermodalism, transportation, or supply chain and port work. What I am asking for is, this is a high wire act. We've got to better balance our approach in helping facilitate the recovery of our economy and jobs, how we want to push business through this port complex for both our private and public sector business interests that create those jobs, and how we can drive thoughtful public policy. Because if we just try to ram things through, bad policy ends up at the very dead end of the road. But if we're thoughtful about this and bringing the private sector in, whether it's the OEMs on the truck side or other science and engineers that can help us get to cleaner technology faster, and putting markets together, or what we call a market maker. Although we're a big port, we can't turn over all the trucks, the rail engines, or other machinery that's right here on our port complex by ourselves. We need others to show the manufacturing community and their tiered suppliers that we, as an intermodal supply chain and port community all rolled into one, can be good customers. And if we give the manufacturers the confidence that we will be good customers and recurring, that gives them more ability to invest that capital, invest in R&D, and accelerate the advancement of cleaner technologies. So this is another big piece of work that's a little more localized in this nation state of 40 million people, but I think it's very important because that'll help the logisticians pick what their gateways of choice will be in the future.
I'm glad you touched on that, because I think that, much like the energy discussion, it's really easy to balkanize the conversation and ignore the fact that we all do live here and we all do play a role in treating our planet well. Here's one that focus on congestion and particularly empties as sort of the West Coast sort of is now the staging ground for, it seems like all the empties in the world are kind of getting, ready to head back to Asia. They're basically asking, have you thought about, or has it been talked about, having sort of a more regional approach to evacuating empties, and not necessarily having to go through just the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Los Angeles or Long Beach, but perhaps sharing it, at least, spreading it out more on the West Coast?
Yeah, and this is a great question and could be a segment in its own right around asset utilization and velocity, but I'll try to explain it briefly and the way folks think in our industry. There is a regional approach today, and most vessel strings are profiled on projected or simulated round trip economics. So I'm bringing 6 ships from Shanghai to Los Angeles, and they're going to have a capacity of 14,000 TEUs on the import side. We're going to need to rotate back a dead weight that accommodates probably 60, 70, maybe 80% export, and the balance being empties going back to Asia. So you want every slot filled on both legs of the trip, eastbound and westbound. If you start pushing empties that went through the Los Angeles gateway out of Houston, it's going to knock everything out of kilter. Same can be said for a place like Houston. The cargo that's coming in, you try to match back with exports and empties on their way back out to the point of origin. So there is a good theory and philosophy in that regionalization. It comes down to trade lane, corridor, and point logic, as they call it in some of our spheres, especially around the Class 1 railroads here in the U.S., which is led over to the liner shipping folks. The other piece to this is that it's about velocity right now. You've got more imports than exports naturally in this country, but now we've exacerbated the trade gap, some based on policy and now based on our own consumer buying patterns that we've covered here today. So in relatively stable times, we're about 2.5 imports to every 1 export. The balance will be empty containers going back. Now we've reached as high as 4 to 5 to 1 imports to exports, and we cannot get the empties back fast enough for the next round of imports. Economics also play a huge role in this, where the export box probably is going to be 20% of the import box rate today, give or take, and that fluctuates based on the market demand, et cetera. But where the liner companies are seeing things as well, it behooves them to more quickly get the empty boxes back to Asia, and through a place like Los Angeles, you have more frequency and a faster transit time, to your point, in Asia, and you're not dealing with the lead time for a US exporter or the extra time on the destination side, where some give 7, 14, 21 days free time for the consignee in China to devan the cargo and get the equipment back to the port. So it just shaves down that cycle time. The average ocean box of a 40-foot variety gets about 8 turns a year in the industry. If they can squeeze a 9th turn, that's another turn of all that revenue coming. So how you maximize that asset velocity is really the focus that you're seeing happening right now. The better long-term play, obviously, is having a better balance of trade through great trade policy and relationships that at least allow you to be competitive on the export side, which, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, jobs in the export sector pay 17% more than jobs in other categories here in the United States. So there are a lot of knock-on effects to the positivity of how we want this American economy to reemerge. But very intuitive question. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Gene. There's a couple of questions in here, and I'm going to kind of pull them together into one around chassis shortage, chassis availability. I know that you have been looking at a lot of different angles on chassis, and you've been talking to all the stakeholders, the motor carriers, the chassis providers, the BCOs, the terminals, very important. So could you just kind of give us an update of the sort of the state of chassis in LA in particular? And this is the other piece. Some folks have been interested in following the sort of operational approach of at least examining moving the chassis out of the terminals to give that space back to terminals and, you know, kind of change the efficiencies with off-terminal chassis facilities.
No, I get where you're going. And my friend Peter Schneider just texted me. The ability to move some of these empties up and down the coast or to regions where we really need them badly should be handled right now. So Peter, I'll be happy to take that offline with you and talk about some of the other ideas that we've had in recent discussions, but great question. On the chassis, they need to be moved off the marine terminals in Los Angeles. We're taking up about 50 to 80 acres of property with chassis that don't move on a regular basis or are used predominantly for stevedoring. Never going to tell the terminal operator how to run their business, but in an effort to give them more land in a time where we're getting this import surge, that's the logical first step. They need to be at near dock locations so we have quick access for the truck community to get a roadable chassis that exceeds federal standards, have a green tag at the marine terminal gate, meaning this has already been inspected. Less than a mile away, you can run right through that gate with the sanctioning of the employer and the ILWU, so long as all the work rules are agreed upon with everybody, and speed up the velocity of these moves. Having a direct line of sight for the mechanics to repair chassis every day and seeing them as opposed to running around in their trucks to different terminals can also speed up getting those chassis back into the normal service population. In addition, we're testing right now with AT&T a modular device that can be sensitive to the weights of a bare chassis, to laden and empty container on them, where they're at from a geography standpoint, and keep an inventory that's refreshed every 30 seconds if you wish. And so getting away from maybe some of the past practices, I know the Port of Los Angeles has led with its chin a little bit to say we'd be happy to invest in this technology on behalf of the service providers and asset owners. And then I think lastly with chassis, we know what's happening right now, and we're the last country in the world to have this model. You're seeing the truck community start to invest more and more in chassis. Here in Southern California, the truck community accounts for about 35% of the chassis pool right now. That will only increase. So finding ways to work very well with the private sector trucking community, getting business rules down where the asset providers can still sell to the trucks as opposed to selling to others may be a way to smooth out some of these humps and these artificial shortages where folks are sitting on boxes. And today the dwell time out on the street is more than 7.3 days compared to a chassis model that was built on a 3.5-day dwell. We're also seeing dwell times increase on the terminals because we're having to shuffle around so many containers to get to these imports that the trucker wants. Again, technology will really drive this, plus the business rules and the inclusion of labor in these discussions to make sure that we have those great skilled folks working on these chassis to spin them out quickly.
Yep. No, that's great, Gene, and I appreciate that that update. And I think we might have seen a presage of what might be some of the education programming to come in 21, because this is definitely a topic that touches everybody and is important. And I think you guys are at the center of some really exciting experiments with operational changes that make a heck of a lot of sense. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate everybody that joined us as attendees today. It was really fascinating. If folks are interested in what else we've got coming up this year, and as we start to put the programming together for next year, I'd encourage you to head over to intermodal.org and take a look there. If you've got questions that you didn't get asked today or that you still have for Gene, go ahead and send those over to me. You can either send them to info@intermodal.org or HAL, H-A-L, at intermodal.org, and I'm happy to get those answered as best we can. Gene, thank you very, very much for your time. I appreciate it. All of our attendees appreciate it. And I know all the folks that are our sponsors, the Platinum Plus level sponsors that support us year long, appreciate it as well, because they a lot of them are on listening to what you had to say as well. And with that, you know my mantra: wear your mask, wash your hands, and stay an appropriate distance apart, and keep working hard to keep everything moving.